Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin today by thanking the Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce for giving us the opportunity and the space to gather collectively as leaders in law enforcement, not just here in Bernalillo County, but from across the state of New Mexico. As the chief law enforcement officer in the state, I have a duty, I believe, to try and help elevate the voice of frontline police and prosecutors. And in many respects, the debate, the conversation that has transpired in this community and in this state over the last several weeks, I think obscures some important facts and realities that the people of this community and the people of every community in New Mexico deserve to hear. But beyond my role as Attorney General, I have a more personal reason for trying to gather these law enforcement professionals together. I was born and raised in this community. My parents still live here. I'm raising two young children in this community, and I am profoundly upset and frankly angry about the lack of progress that has been made specifically with regard to the reduction of gun violence. And I know that the men and women behind me have the same sense of purpose and urgency, and that's why they're here today. I also want to draw attention to the fact that before you stand elected Republicans, elected Democrats, rural county sheriffs, big city chiefs, and what that should signal to all of you is that despite the fact that we do have differences of opinion on a great number of issues, there is still a core sense of purpose and a common understanding about the types of solutions that we need to look at and really examine if we're going to start building a safer community. And my hope is that over the next several hours, when we listen to frontline police officers and we listen to prosecutors and we start synthesizing and comprehending the solutions that they've put forward, that we can start having an intelligent conversation, a conversation that's grounded in reality, a conversation that takes into perspective the views of people who are closest to this problem. And I think if we start to do that, we can start moving in the direction that we need, that we all want for our kids in our communities. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what party we're in, it doesn't matter what office we hold, we are all here because there is someone in our lives and people that count on us to try and be more and to try and elevate the conversation. And I also want to take a moment before I turn it over to some of my colleagues to emphasize something else. This is intended to be an unfiltered view of the perspectives of frontline law enforcement professionals. But that does not mean that the answers and the solutions that you will hear discussed today are the only answers to these problems. And I think everyone here can agree with that. And what I really want everyone to understand is that just because we are listening to police officers and the things that they contend with day in and day out doesn't mean that we shouldn't also consider other ideas, other investments, other solutions and approaches. And I think a lot of times we've gotten into we've fallen into this trap, which is a trap that we should try and avoid in this context, which is, well, it should either be all of one thing or all of the other. I, for example, have never met a frontline law enforcement professional who doesn't support more treatment services for people with behavioral health or more support for substance abuse. And there are going to be a lot of important conversations that still need to be had with respect to those issues. But if we're going to solve the problem of gun violence, we need to start by talking to the people who know the most about gun violence, how this system is working, and more importantly, how this system is failing. And with that, I would like to invite some of my colleagues to the podium, beginning with Sheriff John Allen.
Good afternoon. As you can see behind me and throughout this room, different color uniforms, different areas of the state, different counties, district attorneys, and people of law enforcement. Today we're going to have some tough conversations, but it's so important to understand contrast, differences of opinion, different ideas, and different areas of need for personnel in everybody's different department, whether it's a police department or whether it's a sheriff's office. We want to make sure that we have concrete solutions to give to our lawmakers. I've called them out before saying that we need tougher laws in the books. Everybody says enforce the laws that's in the state statute of New Mexico. They need to be upgraded. They need to be refreshed. They need to be looked at from different angles. We're all suffering here in Bernalillo County, and it's becoming personal, not just to my family, as I've discussed earlier with some media members earlier, but it affects all of us. And when it hits close to home, that doesn't make it about myself or anybody else. It makes it about everybody else. And what I mean by that, it's affecting us all, whether it's retail crime, whether it's homicide, violent crime. It goes on, and we can keep speaking and speaking, but I know that our personnel at the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office and other personnel from different agencies are doing their work. We need to make sure that we follow and adjust our criminal justice system. The big question will be about pretrial release. We'll talk even about my family members who was a victim of gun violence 2 weeks ago. When that person, the offender who's out on an ankle bracelet for gun violence previously and who has a history of gun violence, my nephew and my brother were involved and almost murdered. So that hits real close and personal to me. But can you imagine the victims of homicides and the various victims around the state and what their families are looking at law enforcement leaders and lawmakers to do to make sure that they can have a vibrant life here in the state of New Mexico, the county that they live in, and make sure that they can talk positively about the state of New Mexico. In reference to more gun violence, the recent 11-year-old that we know that was deceased and murdered, is why was that person out? Again, history of gun violence. We haven't addressed anything. We have to have the hard questions. We have to have arguments. We need to do it as a unified front to make sure that we're all communicating, because we're all facing the same issues, no matter how big or small, in our communities, whether it's just not gun violence, but again, with any other crime. We all here want more mental health services, drug addiction services, but we need to make sure that they're also long-term. Again, we need to see what happens short-term, and we have a plan in place to do that. But what happens long-term, and to make sure that we don't have so many times, as I've said, repeat violent offenders that keep victimizing our communities. I've been talking about that since 1997, and here we are in 2023 talking about the same thing, and it's become worse. So now, I appreciate the Attorney General's office for reaching out to all of us to make sure we can have these conversations, and we're ready for the hard questions. We don't get offended. We have very thick skin as law enforcement leaders and officials, but we need to come up with solutions fast. This state's a beautiful state, and it's something that I take personal. Graduated high school here. I was born and raised here. I'm taking this personal. That's why I ran for office, and I'm ready to do anything and everything that I can, whether it's 1 or 2 terms, I don't care. I'm just here to make a difference in our community. That's what I care about. Thank you. Oh, and I'll pass it off to District Attorney Tedrow.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Rick Tedrow. I'm the District Attorney up in San Juan County. I'm here as a Republican. I ran as a Republican. I'm in my 4th term. And I can tell you this, when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to dealing with officers or other DAs, we don't see party politics. What we see is the willingness to want to fix our communities. I think you all would be amazed if you ever sat in a DA meeting where all the DAs from across the state get together, and never once does the term Republican or Democrat come up. What comes up is what is going on in our communities. How can we help our communities? You know, we get the phone calls from victims who seem to be left out. It seems like we have left the victims out of the criminal process for many, many years now. They're the ones that are affected. But we're not, Santa Fe isn't hearing their voices. But we do. The DA's offices get calls daily from victims who are scared, who are angry, who are sad, who have lost something, God forbid when they lose a loved one. They don't know what to do. They don't understand why this process is doing what it's doing. Why is it taking so slow? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? And it's the voice of the victims that we need to listen to. Whether it was their car that was broken into or whether it was a lost loved one. And when I say we have victims, I'm also referring to, and we get these phone calls daily, we get phone calls of what do I do with my son or my daughter who is addicted to drugs? Those are victims as well. And what do we do as a community? I can tell you right here, I think Attorney General Torres mentioned it. We want help for our community members. So if somebody is addicted to a drug, we don't necessarily say throw them in jail. We like to say, how can we help? I understand, that's my neighbor. How can I help my neighbor? How can I help my neighbor's children? And that's where I think we've really forgotten what we're doing in Santa Fe is how do we help our communities? And so I would like to thank Attorney General Torres for giving this opportunity, for taking this on. It's been a long time coming. We've met as groups for years and years and years and talked about what we're going to say in Santa Fe and what we need to say in Santa Fe. A lot of times it feels like it goes on deaf ears. So to have this opportunity to come together and be able to present as a strong front, I'm very grateful to see, and I look forward to working forward, not just today, but from here on out with this. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Chief, I forgot to introduce you.
Thank
But I
you,
know
Rick.
him well.
So thank you all for being here. I want to thank the Attorney General for putting this on. I've been chief in Farmington for a little over 9.5 years now. Came from outside the state. And to watch the events of the last few weeks, I would describe myself as frustrated, which I think you heard a little from Sheriff Allen as well. When you look at where we are, how we got to a moment, a spot in time where we think there's a public health crisis that requires some sort of very broad reaction, it begs the question, how did we get to that? We weren't there 9.5 years ago. So what has changed in New Mexico over the last 9.5 years that has us feeling like gun crime and violent crime is less in control to the point that it's almost a crisis? What has changed that our recruiting and our retention of law enforcement officers is so desperately needed that we're coming up with retention funds and longevity bonuses. We're doing about anything we can to fix this problem, not seeing the interconnection of all of the problems. So from the time I got here 9.5 years ago to where we are today, there's been a lot of steps. So there is no panacea. There is no one solution that we're going to come up with or that Santa Fe is going to come up with that is going to address everything and magically reverse it, because we are just like the frog in the water, where if you have the water boiling and you throw the frog in it, he jumps right out. But if you have the frog in the water and you gradually turn up the temperature, he doesn't even really know it. And that's where we've been with violent crime. That's where we've been with problems with our police. And it started with policing for profit and the efforts to control police use of asset forfeiture funds. And then it moved on to the constitutional amendment, which we all thought was going to keep bad guys in jail and get rid of cashless bail, something in theory I support, but then got turned. And now people are getting out faster and faster. Then it moved to HB4. And HB4 is an effort to hold police accountable and to remove qualified immunity. And suddenly, we can't retain police officers. We can't keep people in jail. Violent crime is getting worse, but we don't see the connections. We don't see the dots that started and that we've been following. The temperature's just gradually been turned up, and now we're sitting in a boiling pot of water, and we don't even get it. And now we're talking about it's such a crisis, we need to suspend constitutional rights in order to try and get things back. And really, it was a long series of decisions that got us here. And we have to have some realistic conversations about how we're going to change that, how we're going to get ourselves back to a spot we once were, where our communities were safe, where people were held accountable, And we actually valued law enforcement, and we had police officers and not a crisis in policing. One of the things I did a few years back following the George Floyd murder was to talk about accountability. There was a lot of pressure on law enforcement. And I said, if you want to talk about improving policing, you start with accountability. But the truth is also the same in our communities. If you don't have accountability for bad guys who are committing crimes and wrecking our communities and hurting innocent people, if there is no accountability, there will be no improvement. It doesn't matter if that's policing or it just with bad guys in our community. There has to be accountability, and I certainly hope that some of the ideas we come out of this will lead us down that path and that people will listen to that. Because I've testified a lot, and you can look my name up. I've testified in a lot of hearings in front of the legislature, and it's never been on a new Get Tough on Crime bill. It's always been on yet another way of scrutinizing the police or restricting the police, year after year after year. And now, shockingly, we're here. And it really isn't a shock. It's just frustrating. So I really commend the Attorney General for bringing us all together here, and I'm very anxious for the conversations. And I bring to you District Attorney Marcus Montoya.
So public safety is the purpose of today's summit, and so I want to thank everyone here today. Thank you, media, for being here. I think we can all agree that it's very important that we tackle gun violence while also promoting gun responsibility. I think we can also all agree that midday main street shootouts is unacceptable. Certain access to certain individuals who have no constitutional or legal right should be discussed. Identifying other individuals who should not have access, it will be a part of the discussion. How we're finding accountability and how we're promoting a better tomorrow for you, your families, your neighborhood, and your community and the citizens of New Mexico. And so today is, I think, a great first step that Attorney General Torres has taken in bringing together law enforcement and prosecutors who are kept mostly silent on this issue and on most public safety issues. And as you've heard, public safety does not impact Democrats or Republicans more or less than the other. And so thank you, Attorney General Torres, and I look forward to today's conversation, and thank you all.
So I want to thank again all of the representatives of law enforcement, the law enforcement leaders that are here. I think we're going to have a productive conversation. We're also going to have a difficult conversation. But that's what this moment requires. It requires us to dig into some of the details on specific ideas that we can present as the law enforcement community to try and guide the legislative process, the policymaking process, to start by, frankly, respecting and listening to the people who do this day in and day out. DA Tedrow's exactly right. You know, for most people, the closest that they will ever get to a violent event is turning on the nightly news or picking up the paper and reading about it, reading about some horrific tragedy, reading about the loss of a child. The men and women who are behind me, they live it every day. They deal with it every day. I cannot tell you how many times I have sat across from a family member, a loved one, a mother, who starts weeping and telling me about who they've lost. And if we have no other goal, it's to stop having those conversations. I have said this many times in this community. I am not looking to be the most effective homicide prosecutor in my community. I'm trying to build a community that doesn't have as many homicides. No one here is looking to go and incarcerate more people. What they're trying to do is find peace and safety and security, which we all deserve. So I look forward to the conversation, and at this time, I'd open it up for any questions that you would have of me or any of the other members of law enforcement behind me. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, so just thank you for having us, by the way, and I know you're stating the conversation is the first step. The only reason why I'm bringing this is because I feel like the governor got everyone's attention with the ban, which many didn't agree with. So the question I have are, what are the proposed solutions? Because we hear a lot of talk with no action, but in the same breath, you know, you're stating that the conversation, having this important conversation is the first step.
So, and that's a great question, and what I would invite you to do is to go across the hall when we're done with this press conference and literally take the time to listen. Because it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, most of the time when we're in Santa Fe, we're sitting in the back of the room. And we're often being talked about, but we're not being asked what we think should be done. House Bill 68, which my office helped to draft for the 2022 legislative session and was sponsored by 3 representatives here in the Albuquerque area, contained a number of very specific ideas for controlling the unlawful use and possession of firearms. Some of the elements of that bill made it into law, but a great many of the other ideas were simply cast aside. And part of what you will hear, I think, in the course of this summit is not just about the substance, but about the process. And so you asked me a question about whether or not the way this conversation got started was the best way. And my response to you is simply this: why not ask these people first what they think needs to be done based on their experience? Ask them. One of the hardest things to do in politics is to shut up and listen. Maybe we should try that. Maybe we should try listening to these men and women, taking from that what we think is possible and achievable, marrying that with other ideas, because they don't know all of the best practices on substance abuse treatment or mental health or lots of other complex solutions that needs to be part of the problem. And the process that you establish and the level of respect that you accord to people matters a lot. And my hope today is to create a process where everyone has a voice. And we're not all going to agree. But I'm not going to tell somebody that their opinion doesn't count. I may say I don't agree with you about that. But it's only by asking the people who are on the front lines, how would you solve this problem? You wouldn't try to reform health care without asking a doctor what they think. You wouldn't try to reform education without asking a teacher what they lived through. And you know what happens in law enforcement? That happens to us all the time. All the time. I don't remember, and I could be wrong, an invitation to the process that is comprehensive, that is open-ended, that is actually asking for real input rather than setting people up because someone already has presumed to know the answer. That's what this is about, and that's why this is different.
We've been here before to a certain extent, even in the past couple of years, with coming up with a list of priorities in an organized way, even among Metro leaders. Why is now, why is this year so urgent, first of all, and why now to bring in all of these different voices? What makes this year different, I should say?
Well, I think one of the things that is represented here is a recognition of the fact that this isn't just a Bernalillo County problem. And I've had the opportunity to lead in this county and talk about specific issues impacting law enforcement in this county. But what you see assembled behind me is the collective perspective of lots of different people from lots of different communities that all have an important contribution to make to that conversation. To your question about the urgency, let me tell you what, for these people, they've been living this urgency for the better part of a decade. They have been asking for help. They have been asking for people to pay attention and listen and not be disregarded for the better part of a decade. I don't know if this year is going to be different. I hope it is. It shouldn't take the tragic death of 2 young people in my community to start asking these folks what they think needs to be done. But if we're going to do anything out of this tragedy, maybe it's that. Maybe it's start listening to the people who know from real life experience what needs to be done.
Can I dive in quick, too?
Yes, Chief.
I mean, you're right. That's part of my frustration, too, is why now all of a sudden? Why haven't we been doing this all along? And from our perspective, within an 18-month period, we had 2 officers shot. We were lucky that neither one were killed. We hadn't had an officer shot in 30 years in Farmington. But last year in January, it was an escaped felon with a stolen gun, and he shoots our officer. And then a year and a half later, we have a mass shooting. Another officer is shot, plus a state officer is shot. In between that, we had an officer that was run over and nearly killed. She still isn't back to duty. So it has been frustrating for me that we can't see how this has eroded over time. But I'm happy that whatever the reason is, now we actually are sitting here talking, and I'm hopeful that it'll mean something.
And Chief, while you're there, AG Torres mentioned in your introduction an unfiltered view that we're gonna get from law enforcement. I know you're gonna have the part of the summit and we're gonna join you over there, but while we've got you in front of us, what does that unfiltered view look like? Just give the public even, just a glimpse of that.
You know, I think I tried to do that a little bit with just the mounting frustration. I think if you talk with a number of law enforcement officers, not just me, around the state, you'll hear the same refrain. We have not had a focus on the right things. We're asking for some assistance on things like gun crime. There should be stiffer sanctions. So when we're talking about getting folks out in pretrial release, I'm actually for it. Well, it's what we talked about, which is low-level offenders, drug offenders that maybe we can divert into other means so that they're not sitting in jail. We're actually getting them help and making a difference. But it hasn't turned out that way. Now we're releasing dangerous people back out onto the streets. We're not holding them accountable, and nobody seems to be in any big hurry to change that. So you're going to get some of that. I think you'll hear it not just from me, but other police officials, that there is frustration that every year we're going back down to Santa Fe to talk about yet another bill that scrutinizes law enforcement and the way we're doing business, and we're not doing anything to improve the standard of conduct within our communities.
Yeah, do you feel that law enforcement has been ignored by lawmakers at the state level, and then what about the local level?
My view is that police and prosecutors are usually the last people that get asked, specifically with respect to really consequential proposals about criminal justice reform. They really are just not included in the conversation. And there will be, either a change in the way the process is done in the courtroom or out on the street, and no one seems interested, really, in slowing down and asking them how it's going to impact their ability to keep the community safe. And that needs to change. That needs to change. I think there just needs to be a greater appreciation for what they do and what they've learned with all their years of experience. And just ask. Have the decency to ask, what is this going to do to your day-to-day life and your ability to keep people safe? It doesn't mean, and it shouldn't mean, that everything that law enforcement wants, they're going to get. I think they just want to be listened to. I think they just want to be heard. And I don't think dictating to them what is going to happen is the right approach to solving our public safety crisis and reducing gun violence in our communities.
And of course, there's been strong words among local and state leaders in the past couple of weeks with everything that's transpired with the governor. And in a statement from the governor, not even 2 weeks ago, she said she's looking for state leaders to step up, take bold steps to make New Mexicans safer. Is that what's happening today?
Well, I think everybody needs to be held accountable and be responsible for the role that they play in delivering positive change for people. I have lost count at this point how many times I have gone to Santa Fe talking about pretrial detention and the problems with pretrial detention. House Bill 68, as I mentioned, would have expanded the definition of a school zone and created a broader area of protection for children. It would have provided enhanced penalties for people that use firearms in connection with a crime of violence, whether they brandish a gun or discharge a gun. Those things didn't make it into law. My obligation is to keep people focused on those solutions and focused on why those solutions will have a meaningful impact for people. I hope the governor will receive those and the legislative leaders will receive those in the spirit that they're offered. And I'm prepared to work with anyone, and so is everyone here, on real, concrete, serious, thoughtful solutions to serious problems.
We have time for one more question.
I feel like you just wrapped that up in Julie's question. Thank you, but
Okay.
basically just gonna say, like, what changes are you guys hoping to see at next year's session? Because you guys are clearly not giving up hope at this point. You guys, every year, same issues, same problems, but you feel like it's falling on deaf ears. So what specific changes are you guys hoping to see at next year's session?
Well, I hate,
I feel like she just,
I hate to give you the same answer, but I think what you'll probably hear over the next 3 hours is a real detailed conversation about exactly those solutions and those issues. And look, we may not all be on the same page on all of these issues, but how am I going to build consensus if I don't make space for folks in the room who have a different perspective than I do? Right? That's not how we lead change in a society. We don't just dictate policy. We start having a conversation and we make sure that everyone's included. And you heard it from law enforcement. I don't want you to miss it and I don't want you to forget it. No one here is going to come to the conclusion of this summit and say, here, enact only the things that law enforcement wants and the problem will be solved. Chief Hebby said that exactly. We want to hear about substance abuse treatment and behavioral health resources. We want to and need to have a conversation about all of those things. And here's an idea. Maybe we should talk about all of those things all the time in a comprehensive way. And you'll get that and much more across the hall. Yeah. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it, and I really do hope you'll enjoy the program.